see it? Can you sit in here?
I can, yes.
I
think we've got me, and we were waiting on a few more, but I know there's a couple people that said they're gonna be late as well. So we'll give like a couple more minutes here and then we'll get started. Did everyone get a handout, a little packet? Okay. I'll be going through the slideshow and you have copies of the slides. I know they're really small, so I'm sorry, but I was trying to save a little bit of ink and paper and hopefully you can still read them. Feel free to take notes as we go through. That's your mom?
Yeah.
Okay, we didn't get started yet.
Okay. Great thing on the table left.
You're good, I didn't start yet. I'm just, Does everybody have a notebook and pen as well? If you do not, I have extra paper over there. We are going to be doing some writing today, in addition to me jibber-jabbering up here, so that'll be the fun part. Hopefully the whole thing's a fun part, if I do my job right. So I want to get a little feel for like this group. How many of you have published something before? Excellent, excellent. 2 of you, awesome. 3 of you, awesome, awesome. Full-length novels or articles or both?
Novels, articles.
Okay, awesome. Articles, okay, awesome. How many of you have a full-length manuscript sitting at home that they want it to be their goal to publish?
Call it that, but
Okay. Hey, any work in progress is good. You said you do too? Okay, awesome. Okay. Hey, that counts. That counts. And then how many of you want to eventually write a full-length manuscript and publish it? That would probably be most of you because you're in this class. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to try not to say awesome every time. It's been a while since I did public speaking stuff, so bear with me. Alright, we got a couple more coming in, and then we will get started. We're going to be covering a lot of information, and I'm going to kind of roll through it pretty fast so that we do get to talk about it all. So if you come up with a question, write it down, and then if I have not answered it through the end of the presentation, we'll do it, I will answer them at the end, okay, before we break off into writer groups, okay? But I do want to make sure I get everybody's questions as well. There we go. Back on track. Right. We're on time. I think we've got most of our people. Are we ready? All right, everybody, welcome to our writer workshop. No, the status update. Thank you very much. Okay. My name is J.A. Stein. I recently just published my first novel, Nidus. I actually do go back and have a bachelor's degree in English and a bachelor's degree in equine business. Now, I've been doing the whole equine thing for the past 12 years since I graduated. So writing kind of got pushed to the sideline, but when I was in college, I was a very active writer. We had a writers club. I published a few articles while I was still in school, won a few contests, won a few scholarships, and mainly, I've always loved writing, and I've always wanted to be an author. At least since 7th grade. I had a really awesome teacher in 7th grade, and she really just had me fall in love with books, and I wanted to be a writer. And then when the horse thing took off, I kind of pushed that to the sideline because that is my passion. But writing was always still there, and I did it in my spare time, and it was fun. Fast forward, and I would work on this novel that's been in the works for 20-some years. In my spare time, and eventually I brought it to fruition, and that is what is now Nidus. And now I have another one coming out in a few months, really. April 1st is going to be the launch of book 2 in that series. So what we want to accomplish today is to gain a clearer picture of the writing process so that you guys know what the steps are from beginning to end, from, okay, I have an idea, I want to turn this into a book, to, okay, how do I get it to the world? Okay? And some of you have already done that or are in various stages thereof, which is awesome. But hopefully I can give you some more tricks that I've learned by trial and error to help you on your process as well. I want you to understand what's involved with the publishing process. There's a couple pitfalls I've found, and I want to make you aware of those, just so you know what to look out for. And we're going to then do some brainstorming and outlining tricks that hopefully, when we break off into our groups, you guys can use those skills to both grow with your critique partners, which is what another goal that we have today. I want you all to make friends that are fellow writers, that you can really kind of work together away from this class to help further your own projects. Okay? So the writing process starts with brainstorming, and there's a couple different ways you can brainstorm ideas. I don't know if you guys remember the brainstorming bubbles back from, hopefully your elementary school teachers taught you this, but it starts with a central idea, and from that you draw lines off and with all these other ideas until it becomes this crazy mess. This is actually one of my bubbles from my novel when I was in the process. I got stuck about halfway through, and I was like, okay, why would he do this? This makes no sense. And I kind of wrote myself into a hole, and then I had to write myself back out of the hole, and that's what crazy thoughts look like. Another way of brainstorming is to write an outline. How many of you here have heard of National Novel Writing Month? NaNoWriMo. Yes, have you ever done it?
No.
Oh, it's so much fun. I did it for the first time this year. I started with my outline on one piece of paper. Okay? I wrote an entire 55,000 word novel off of this one piece of paper. Okay? In 1 month. So, if you have not tried NaNoWriMo before, I highly recommend it. It will challenge you. It will kind of give you skills of time management that, okay, I'm going to sit down and I am going to write for X number of minutes each day and get how many words down per day, and hopefully by the end of the month you all have a novel. But anyway, and now it is possible to come up with a whole novel from one-page outline. Now I did expand greatly from this as I wrote and changed things because that's just how my brain works, but it is possible, okay? Another crazy way to brainstorm is flashcards. And this way you don't hear about quite as often. And I've heard other people have done this, but I thought I had created something new. But what I kind of did, this was for my second book. This is how my second book started, okay? I didn't have an outline, I didn't do bubbles, I just had a couple of ideas. I jotted them down on my cards, and I'm like, spread them out on my kitchen table. I'm like, okay, what order do we want to put these cards in? Like, I knew I wanted to get from point A to point B, and there was like 20 other points in between. So, just another idea for you as you're trying to compile your novel. It's very helpful to do it this way when you write a non-linear novel, which is what my second one actually is. For those of you that don't know, that's a novel that doesn't follow your traditional beginning to end timeline and helps you to kind of shuffle things around and move. Another way to brainstorm is to simply sit down with your notebook and start writing. And I kind of wrote, this is what Margaret Atwood does. She's admitted that, like she sits, carries a notebook around, and she'll sit there and she will write until she gets all of her thoughts out. And then the downfall to free writing is that you end up throwing a lot away. But you also can get some really brilliant things down on paper, okay? Which kind of takes me into our next part, which is, what do you need to know to start? What do you need to know in order to sit down and actually start your novel? I broke it down into 3 things, okay? 3 primary things. You need the what, the who, the when, okay? What is your story about? Like, is it, and who is it about, okay? You want to have at least one character as you start out, okay? Even if your character is a frog, okay? The frog turns into a prince. That's now your idea of your story, okay? It starts with an idea. So the what, the who, and the when is the story taking place. And I put when in there because it could be in the past, it could be in the present, it could be in the future, it could be a different century, it could be the current time. That's a really good thing. It could split between times. All of that stuff is really good to know before you start writing because it makes the development process go a lot smoother and a lot faster, okay? And I also put here, you want to know what point of view you want to tell your story in as you start writing. That is something that can be changed further down the line. I did it myself. It is a lot more work to change it down the line. Okay, I actually just read a Colleen Hoover book, and she actually had in the back of her book that she had written one, like got halfway through it, was entirely in second person, and then her editor said, no, we have somebody else writing one in second person, you need to put this back in first person. And she was like, okay, rewrite the entire book. So it's one of those things, if you think about it ahead of time, what kind of voice you want to have and how you want the story to be told, it's way easier to know that starting out. Okay? After you have your who, what, when, you can start to actually write, okay? So taking everything that you've done in your brainstorming process, hopefully developing some idea of where you want the story to head to, then you can actually develop the book, okay? And this is the part where different things work better for everybody. Some people like to just sit down on a daily basis at the same time and to be like, okay, I'm going to write from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. And if you can do that every day and that's how your novel gets chipped out, that's great. Or other people, I'm one of them, I like to sit down uninterrupted for like a good 6-8 hour stretch and just get it all out. The longer I have, the better I find my writing comes out because I can really get into the world that I'm trying to build. Some people are morning people, some people are night people. I'm a middle of the day person because that's when I have time, when I'm not doing the horse stuff. So the bottom line is you find what works best for you, whatever time and however much time it takes to help you develop your project, okay? Do you want to write according to an outline? Or do you like to read a chapter, maybe skip ahead a few chapters, and then go back and fill in the middle later? That's also an option. There is no rule that says you have to write in a particular way. And a little bit you kind of have to experiment to find what works best for you. The best thing to do is just keep writing, okay? And this last line is really important. It was one of the best things I saw. It was in a presentation, and actually in the very back of your packet there's a list of links that I included for you all. And it's a YouTube video, but the two guys were talking about this, and this was one thing that they really agreed on, was never stop without jotting down what you are going to write next. So that means if you stop writing, you're like, oh man, I really need to go get a drink of water, you write down, okay, I was going to have Billy Bob go to the zoo next. Okay? Just let yourself a note so you know where to stop. It's much easier than having to go back and be like, oh man, what was I going to write next? What was going on in the story? I better read my whole last chapter over. And then you spend an hour rereading your last chapter that you wrote, and then you're like, oh, okay, now I remember. But now you just wasted an hour trying to think of what you were going to write next. Whereas if you jot yourself a note, then you can continue on. Okay? This picture here, by the way, was the very first lines I wrote of Nidus, way back when I was in study hall in high school. So it started out not even entirely in English, because I was in French class at the time, so I thought it was really cool to write it in French. But it's interesting for as much as this, and I wrote it like as a journal, and it was in first person. The actual book is in third person, not in a journal at all. But the core storyline is still the same. It's still the same year. It's still, the main character's name is still Eleanor. And if you look up at this really little fine print, it was she fell in love with a knight and she had a cruel uncle that she's running away from. So that story, 20 years later, came into something. So bottom line is, once you start writing, don't be afraid to just let it roll and see where you're at, okay? Pitfall number 1, please pay attention to your grammar as you write. You will thank yourself later, okay? Number 1, most publishers and editors are using the Chicago Manual of Style as their go-to, this is the way the English language is supposed to be book. So if you don't own one, I highly recommend getting one, or I'm sure libraries have them you can borrow and review them. Kind of go over your grammar rules if you're a little rusty from school or still learning them in school. Pay attention to the comma rules. I was going to make you all a handout on commas because commas kind of make me crazy, but I think you all can look that up on your own. But your critique partners and your editors will really thank you going forward if you pay attention to your grammatical structures and whatnot. Point of view is also a really good thing to review before you get too deep into your novel, okay? Look up the rules of first person, second person, third person point of view. Something I didn't learn until like 2020, which is really embarrassing considering I have an English degree, is that there are 2 types of third person point of view. There is omniscient and there is limited. And there is a difference between the 2 of them. I had mine written in kind of this half and half thing, and it wasn't until I started getting other people's eyes on my manuscript that they were like, what are you doing? So the big rule between omniscient and limited is allowed to get in the character's head. Okay? Remember, third person is he, she, like you're telling it across the word. You're not I. You are not saying it from the I point of view, which would be first person. But if you're getting in the character's head with limited, do not include things that an omniscient narrator would know. So it's kind of this fine line. Like if you're going to stay in one person's head, stay there. And don't flip back and forth between characters. We call that head hopping in the writing world. You don't want to bounce between your character's head like, oh, she was thinking of how handsome he looked, and he was thinking of how pretty she looked. Like, that's head hopping, okay? So be careful of that, because that's another thing. It's really hard to fix later, especially if you write something that sounds really awesome, and then you're like, oh wait, you can't get in that character's head. It's really sad. all of that said, grammatical rules can also be broken. For instance, I have the example of the color purple up here. I don't know, has anybody read it? Okay, a couple of you. It's a book that she actually uses wrong grammar, even though she knows correct grammar, to tell the story. So it's really kind of beautifully done in that regard. But one of the more obvious things is, like, when I first submitted my manuscript to my editor, it was like, okay, I know this is a fragment sentence, but it's kind of, it's how she's thinking in this moment. It's how they're talking in their conversation. She's like, it's narrative. You're allowed to bend some of those rules if they serve the voice of what you're trying to portray, okay? So it's important to know what the rules are, and that said, you are allowed to break them if it's what you're trying to accomplish, okay? All right, so I don't have this lovely statement here just for kicks. It is for kicks and giggles, but it has nothing to do with, I want you to punctuate that sentence. Before I switch to the next slide, punctuate that sentence. This is just one of those really funny things. You can write it right on your paper. This is just an example of how grammar and punctuation can be utilized to change your story. Everybody's got it punctuated? 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Did you get a handle, Kathy?
Yeah, I have it. I know where to put my comma, so.
Okay, ready? Set? So, this was, apparently, this one goes around the internet a lot, but you've got, apparently a professor wrote this in their class, and the class wrote it 2 different ways. We have woman without her man is nothing. Do you think the men or the women wrote it that way? And then we have woman without her, man is nothing. The way you put the pauses and the punctuation changes the meaning. Okay, just I thought that was fun. I had to share that. Okay, really, I'm going to just go through these really quickly. Items of a series, you need a comma. Don't forget the Oxford comma, which is this one. There's actually been lawsuits over that comma, which is actually kind of interesting. Before conjunctions, there's a couple exceptions to that rule. Make sure you study up on those. Introductory worded phrases, non-essential elements, and introducing quotations. Okay, so now you have your full manuscript done. Yay, have a party. Okay? It's a hard work to finish a novel. By the way, how long is a novel? What is considered novel length? Do you guys know?
60,000?
50.
50?
50. 30 to 50 is considered novella. There's also a more recent trend for novelettes. There's some publishing platforms online now that you can do little novelettes, which are like 15 to 30,000 words. But usually 50,000 upwards. Some like sci-fi or fantasy novels will go into the 200,000 word category. Most publishers want to see your manuscript under 100,000 words, so somewhere between 50 and 100,000 words. Like mine for Nidus was in that like 106,000, and really that's still kind of on a little bit of the upper end of long for a first novel. So if I had a real publisher, they probably would have done some more cutting, but I couldn't do it. So your first read through. Now you've written your whole manuscript, okay? You want to go through it top to bottom, just you. Don't let other people read it yet. This is still in the development phase. You want to be able to put your thoughts, You want to be able to manipulate your characters. If you start reading through and you're like, why did I have that character do that? I can't do that. Scrap it and change it. That's the beauty of being the author. You can do whatever you want, okay? You also don't want to take other people's influence and they're like, oh, I hate this character, and then you change it, and maybe that character is really like the best character in your book. You'll know that as you read through on your own, okay? So get it to where you want it first before you let other people see it. And you also want to spare your friends the typos, because you will find lots of them. I don't care how good of a typist you are, you want to get them out. And it's okay if when you're writing, you write it all by hand too. That is totally fine. That is totally a personal preference thing. I have another slide coming up that you do want to type things down eventually, but just something else to keep in mind, okay? A really good trick is to read it out loud, okay? You will hear things that aren't right when you read it out loud. We used this trick when I was tutoring all the time. I would sit my what would you call them, a 2D, down, and have them read their paper. And it's amazing how many things, and I'll sit there myself, I'm like, okay, this paragraph is just weird. And I'll read it out loud, and I'll be like, oh, that's right, like I need a comma there, or this just sentence is awkward, let's rearrange this sentence. Okay, now that's better. It really helps if you can sit there and read it to yourself. You'll also find and fill in the holes. My NaNoWriMo project that I did, I got halfway through, and I was kind of like stuck in a rut writing-wise. I was like, okay, I think there's some holes in the stories. Go back through and you read it and you're like, oh, okay, I need to have this character more developed. I need to have this storyline either needs to be developed or I need to throw it out and cut it out of the manuscript entirely. Like, you'll see that kind of stuff. And what I do is in my manuscript, I do most of mine on just typing, so it's already in Word. In Word, you can use the comment feature. I highly recommend it. If you find a spot where, even as you're writing, you're like, oh, okay, I have to remember that this needs to be developed later in the book, like after this event happens. Write yourself a note, and then as you get into the later editing phases, then you'll remember the book and see if you've developed it already or not. This is also really important, guys. Do not,
Sorry.
you're good. Do not delete stuff you don't like, okay? Even if you hate it, you know it has to leave the manuscript. It's okay, it can leave, but don't delete it entirely. You got a couple different options. One, cut it and paste it into a new document. Like, I have a document that I label deleted chapters, okay? And like if I just have one little section that I want to throw out, I'll throw it in there, and then it can sit there and it'll probably rot, and it's fine, but at least I know where my brain was going at that part of the development process. If I am doing a full manuscript revision, okay, so like I'm talking, like, so say you do your first draft, okay? Once I start that second draft and I start changing big picture things or developing characters more or adding like entire chapters in or deleting entire themes of the story, I start a whole new document. Use the save as feature, keep the prior manuscript, start over on the new manuscript. That way you still have your old revisions and you have your current revisions. And so like for Nidus, I have probably 8 or 9 full-length manuscripts on my computer that are all totally different. So just don't delete it entirely because you never know when you're going to use that. Like I'm actually going back and using stuff that I had thrown out probably 10 years ago into book 3 now. It's very changed, but it's still, it's the story concepts that are still there. Once you have your manuscript as good as you can possibly make it, that is when you are ready to move to the next step, okay? This may take more than one read through. Like I said, it took me like 9 different full-length drafts at least before I let anyone else read Nidus, okay? Now that might have been a little over the top. It didn't take me that long with some of my other books, but still. That's also why you need to get your manuscript typed, okay? All of you that have admitted to me that you're slow typers, work on that skill, because you're gonna need to type it, and I don't know if you could hire anybody to type it for you, but you're gonna wanna type it yourself because you're gonna want control over what's going in there, and you're gonna be doing edits as you go anyway. Your reviewers and your editors are all gonna need a typed out copy in order to kind of work on it, okay? Whether that's a printed typed out copy or a digital copy, which we're gonna talk about in a minute. Okay, that takes us to critique partners, okay? So your primary critique partners are gonna be your friends, your family, and your other writing partners that maybe you do or don't know, okay? Friends and family are great. I have a few in this room. I will tell you, they are not, they read my stuff from a very different eye than what my critique partners do, my writing critique partners. Like, my mom usually likes what I write. She will give me some big picture ideas, but she doesn't go through the fine stuff line to line of, okay, this sentence just sounds awkward, like that kind of stuff. I've used a site called Critique Match, where I've kind of allied with some fellow writers, and those ladies on there, and there's been a few gentlemen that I've worked with as well, but they will go over my manuscript with a fine-tooth comb, and they will point out so many more thoughts than most of my family or friends will, because they are also writers. And that is kind of the purpose of this workshop today. A writer looking at something is different than a reader looking at something. And in the development process, you want both sets of eyes on your work, because they are going to be reading it from different perspectives. A reader is going to tell you, okay, this is fluid, this was a fun story. You want to know that, okay? A writer reading your stuff is going to look at it more from a structural point of view, be like, okay, can you develop this character more? Can you explain why you're having this plot element developed? Because as we write, we know in our heads what we want to get down. Okay, we know what the story is. We don't always actually write that down though. So what we might think is perfectly clear, some of our friends or our writing partners are like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, you totally skipped an entire section between chapter 2 and 3. Like, what's going on in the development here, okay? So we're going to use this workshop. Hopefully you can all network and find some critique partners in real life. I will recommend that you go online to also look for critique partners, but with great caution, okay? Very great caution. Do not just go emailing your manuscript to someone that you found on Craigslist, okay? Technically, whenever you write something down, you own the copyright to that work, okay? That said, it's very hard to defend it if you do not have it already filed with the U.S. Copyright Office, okay? And especially if it takes you years from the time that you're writing it to get to publication. Yes, you could probably show them, look, I have all of my notes, I have my outline, this was my story. But it's going to be a big hassle to defend it. You don't want somebody to just steal your work, okay? So share it with caution. What I liked about Critique Match is they do have some protocols in place to prevent people from stealing your work. I usually will send a couple chapters at a time to my critique partners. They send a couple of their chapters back to me, so they're taking the risk along with me. Okay, and Critique Match has a very strict policy that you cannot copy and paste. They will actually kick you off of their software if they detect that you are copying and pasting between like someone else's stuff. Like, you can only open the file in their portal on their website, okay? And then once you have submitted that critique, it goes back to the writer, so whether that's you or your critique partner, and then it's not sitting in your inbox anymore, which is really nice. I sent my manuscript to a friend in college once, and I never heard back from her again. I'm sure it's fine. It obviously was never published that I've heard of, but it's just one of those things. I was like, why did I do that? That was so stupid. Like, now I don't see her. She graduated, and she still has my manuscript, and it's probably still in her email somewhere, and it's just that kind of stuff you want to be aware of, be careful, make sure whatever, there's more like work sharing websites like Critique Match out there, just vet them first, look at reviews from other people, all of that kind of thing, okay? Okay, so as you are both reading through your friend's manuscript and as they're reading through your manuscript, you want to make comments throughout. Not only looking at grammatical stuff, like, oh, you missed a comment here. That's fine if you're looking for more of a line-by-line kind of read-through, which would be if you think your manuscript's at a very high level. But the big thing you want them looking at is the actual story stuff. Like, are the characters developed? Are the plot lines developed? Does it make sense? Like, are your word choices accurate, or are they a little awkward, okay? One of my favorite things to see written on my critique is not just all the stuff that's wrong with my manuscript, but also the stuff that they like. Like this comment here, I love this line, is such a fun thing to see when you get someone's critique back. You're like, oh yeah, I love that line too. I'm so glad someone else thought it was good. I was trying to be funny. It worked. You know, that kind of thing. Or it also kind of reinforces, like, sometimes as a writer you do things within your text and you're like, oh man, I don't know if this is going to work or not. I don't know how the readers are going to take this. And if you get that feedback from your partners, like, yes, you are right on, this is exactly where I was as I was reading through this is what I think of this character, like, I hate this character, and you're like, yes, I really wanted you to hate that character. Like, then you know you're doing your job right, okay? So just something to think of. If you don't use a site like Critique Match that allows a commenting feature, you can also send chunks through Microsoft Word. Just make sure you turn on the track changes button. If you don't know what that is, it can maybe show you at the end, but it's a really important feature that you're going to want to use in Word. You can also just print out copies. Like when we did Writers Club in college, we didn't share anything digitally. Like I said, it's too much of a risk. But what we would do is we would bring a couple chapters at a time, share them around the table, and people would just write on them and kind of give them back to you and be like, okay, this is what I thought, you know. So printing things out. Printing things out also helps you, again, to see stuff that you may have missed. I know once I read it on my laptop 10 times, my eyes like put words where they're not actually there, just because I know that's where they're supposed to be. But when you actually print it out, you'll be like, oh yeah, I need like another the there or something like silly like that, okay? You can hire a developmental editor at that stage if you really want some professional feedback, okay? Keep in mind too, most developmental editors will not be your final line editors. You do not want them to be your final line editor, because just like you read your manuscript a dozen times and your eyes skip things, if they've read your manuscript a dozen times, they're going to skip things as well, okay? So you want fresh eyes on your manuscript when you get to that final line editing stage, okay? Okay, so applying others' feedback. Okay, so you've sent it out, you got some eyes on it, they give it back to you. You do not have to take every suggestion someone gives you, okay? You pick and choose what you want to use in the storyline, okay? for example, if you can see on this picture, these are X's. My sister wrote comments. She wrote comments here, she wrote comments here, she wrote comments here, she wrote comments here. I don't like any of those ideas. That's okay, it's your story. You're allowed to do whatever you want. Now, if you get the same comments back from multiple readers, like, hey, this really doesn't make any sense, then maybe you actually have a problem in the manuscript and you do really have to look into that more and actually fix things. And what I found again is kind of what we talked about before, is it still in your head, and that's why there's a hole in the plot line, okay? And sometimes these edits are, what is your goal with your story and where do you want to take the reader? Nidus did not start out as a romance novel. I wanted it to be historical fiction, I wanted it to be clean and neat, and it's not, and I won't let my students read it. It kind of went the romance direction because I had a critique partner that was like, if you aren't making this a romance novel, then all of this has to be cut out. And all these changes would have had to be made. So I kind of started steering it towards the romance category, and then halfway through I kind of changed my mind, and then it's so now it kind of borders both worlds, and book 2 I made much more clear, not a romance world, but it's still there. But anyway, know what you want your Goldie story to be. It's your story. If you want it to be a cross-genre thing, do it. Okay, there's a lot more of that kind of stuff out there right now. And we're going to talk about that later. The research or flag things you have questions on is good to know. Kind of like we said about using that comment feature, use that comment feature. If your critique partners are pointing out stuff that is a big hole, you want to go back and research and develop if you need to, okay? Criticism is scary. It can hurt. When done well, it will make your story grow. Be brave, okay? So don't be afraid to let other people read your stuff. It's not going to get better if you don't get people's feedback. It's just going to still be yours. And it's okay to keep it in the this is only mine stage as long as you need it to be. I kept mine in that stage for 18 years. But at a certain point, if you want to develop it, you have to let it expand. Lindsay, there's more chairs out here.
Oh no, I was sitting all morning at work, so
Okay.
don't mind me, don't believe me.
Okay. And remember, when you guys are reading your critique partner stuff, remember they're very emotionally invested in what they've written as well. It's a lot of work to write anything. And it's really scary when you're putting your heart and soul out there for somebody else to read it. Be positive when you give your feedback, okay? Find the good things that they're doing and reinforce those. Yes, you have to tell them what they're maybe not so good at, but you do want to reinforce what they're really doing awesomely so that they keep doing that, okay? Once you get it, that you're really confident with where it's at in the developmental process, that may take many drafts, that is when you want to sit down and do one more read-through, okay? At this stage, what I usually do is I will print the whole thing out, and I will sit there like I'm reading a book, and I will go through the whole thing with a pen and just make all of my last edits, okay? That's my last chance to kind of be looking at what my critique partners recommended, tweaking things as I need to. You're using this kind of as a proofread. Get rid of those typos, make sure your grammar is good, make sure your comments are in the right spot. Make it like you could push publish tomorrow, okay? You want it to be as sparkling as you can possibly make it at this stage. That doesn't mean you're done. There's still more to come, don't worry. But you wanna get it as good as you possibly can. You will be sick of reading it by this point. Because remember, by this point, you've probably read the same chapters 10, 12 times or more. You've probably read the entire length of the manuscript 3 or 4 times or more. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to be frustrated with it. But what I want you all to remember, go back to it again. If your break is a week, that's fine. If it's a day, that's fine. If it's a month, that's fine. If it's 2 years, that's fine. But go back to it, okay? Don't let it sit in the closet forever because you're like, oh, this is never going to be good enough. You get fresh eyes on it, you'll make it better. I promise. You really will. Like I said before, read it in another format as well. Like, that is not... Yes. Okay, this is what we want to talk about next. Okay. Once you have it as sparkling as you can possibly make it, that is when you have to make the big publishing decision. Because that is when you are making the decision of how much you are going to be investing into it on your own versus how much energy you're putting into finding an actual traditional publisher. Okay, so self-publishing, traditional publishing, they're kind of similar, but they're very different, okay? Our world today is so much more open to people that want to self-publish than it used to be even 5 or 10 years ago, okay? The process has really been greatly streamlined. We'll talk, I'm getting ahead of myself. So if you want to seek a traditional publisher is still pretty much the epitome of being an author, okay? I have a friend who is traditionally published, and she has her master's in English, and I asked her when I was debating what to do with mine, I'm like, so why would you traditionally publish when you can make so much more by self-publishing? And she's like, it's the repertoire, okay? It's because she was a college professor, you're taking much more seriously if you traditionally publish and you have that in your resume, okay? So that was her big driving thing. And what she did was she actually pitched a story to the publisher and then wrote the story. But she was already very well established as a writer, had written a bunch of articles, so she had the resume to go up to the publisher and be like, look, I published all this, this is my idea, I want to compile this. It's a little bit different than those of us that are completely unknown, have no writing resume, and are approaching a publisher, okay? First of all, you need a query letter, and then you need an agent. Your query letter goes to the agents. The agent is who intercedes between you and the publisher to hopefully get you the publishing deal. If you want to be in one of the big 5 publishers, which are listed here, okay? And there's a lot of different subcategories under those big 5 names, okay? I'm standing in the way, sorry. But you need an agent in order to even approach them. They will not take unsolicited manuscripts. You must have an agent provide them with the manuscript. So that means you have to take the query letter, send them to agents, find an agent that's in love with your book, and then the agent has to find a publisher that's in love with your book, okay? That whole process can take a few years, so just be forewarned. Traditional publishing is not for people that want to see a quick publication come out, okay? If you want to see your book in print next year, don't even try to go traditional. It is unfortunate, but that's kind of the reality of that world. After you find a publisher that wants to take your book, your royalty, and I was trying to find this online, but the royalty is about 10%. It's not much. You figure, I had another bookseller tell me that traditionally published authors usually can expect to make maybe $1 per book that they sell, which is very small margin considering how much effort you're putting into writing it. And sometimes that will also be in addition to an advance, but word on the street right now is that advances are very hard to get, if not impossible. At least until you've really established yourself as a writer and you have a good resume behind you. Does have that higher critical acclaim, and the big thing with the traditional publisher is it's not going to cost you anything out of pocket. Okay, you do not have to hire your editor. If you guys look over to the second column here, when you're self-publishing, you need to hire an editor, okay? You need to format your own book. You need to design your own cover. You need to list your book. You need to print copies that you actually want to sell and pay to print those copies. They don't print copies of your book for free. All of that adds up, okay? In traditional publishing, you don't have any of that cost. The time to go through publication, assuming you can find an agent in a relatively short amount of time, is still about 2 years. And that's 1 or 2 years from acceptance of the manuscript. But once the publisher has accepted your manuscript, then you, my train of thought again, I'm sorry guys. But once they've accepted it, then you still have to go through the whole editing process a couple times with the publisher to really polish it up, okay? And meanwhile, they're in the background, designing your cover, getting ready to market, all of that kind of stuff. One thing that really surprised me that I've learned, even if you are traditionally published, and especially if you publish with a small press, so not one of the big 5, you still are in charge of your own marketing. You still need to do your own legwork, your own social media, your own book campaigns and stuff to get your book out there that the world knows about it. The publisher is going to help you a little bit, especially on the initial launch, but if your launch goes flat, it's on you to keep selling your book, which I thought was very interesting. Now, switching over to the self-publishing side of things, which is what I'm going to be talking about more because that is what I did with my book. You have the cost of an editor. We're going to break all of these factors down even more here, okay? The formatting, the cover, listing,